What's up, guys? I'm back with another video about Alexandra Naughton's newest blog post, and this one is really interesting because for a few reasons, actually. The format that this one is done in is a really cool idea about it being like a kind of like a panel interview discussion type of thing, which is really cool. But the thing that's really interesting about this is that the fact that it is a guide to online lit or online writing, where it literally like defines terms of what things are and what different things mean and stuff. And that's super interesting because I was just thinking back to when I got into this stuff myself. I started writing seriously in about 2012, and I didn't publish my first short story until 2018. But right when I started writing, that was back in 2012, and how I basically did that to kind of understand this whole world and everything. I didn't have a nice little concise blog post like this. I I basically read this book written by the Gotham Writers Workshop, literally called Writing Fiction, and it is this yellow book. Um, and this book came out in 2003, and I bought it used from eBay, and it's so wild because it the stuff that they talk about in this book is specifically like about the submitting, the query letters, all that kind of stuff, the submission guidelines, where you find magazines, how you find magazines, all that stuff. It's so wild because everything is so completely different, except for basically the formatting of query letters and cover letters that you send with submissions and stuff. Outside of that, it's so different because this book was published again in 2003, and I read it in 2012, so it's like this book is 23 years old. But it's so crazy because like I'm just looking at this book. I had one page saved for the longest time, and it's the cover letter page, and it just says, there's a part that just says, if there are so many literary magazines, how do I choose, you might ask? And then the author says, easy, you begin by consulting the market guides. And the market guides are industry directories and periodicals that provide essential information on book and magazine publishers, who they are, what they want, how to submit to them. So these were giant books that you could buy that cost like $40, and it would just list hundreds of magazines in it, and it would be, the address where you have to, literally mail the paper copies of your submission. You always have to include the what is it, the self-addressed return envelope or whatever, the SE or whatever it was. I don't remember what that was called, but they say that 100 times in this book. Never forget the self-addressed return envelope, or else you won't get a response. Like, it's so wild, that just the way that stuff was done and how it was so different. And it's so funny because I remember buying one of those industry directories, and again, it was like $40, brand new from Amazon or from wherever, probably from the website of the publisher. And I can't even imagine how out of date it was the second it was published, because I'm assuming they have to have some kind of like 5, 6, 7 month lead time. So like that information is obsolete the second that book is published, and you have to pay $40 for it, at least. So that was one thing that was just really funny. So this blog post is really cool, and it's really helpful to clear up a lot of the, terminology that newer writers might come into contact with in the you know, looking at the submission guidelines of different magazines, and also in terms of just a lot of the unwritten rules that are not even listed uh, when you look at the submission guidelines. Um, because, a lot of magazines aren't going to tell a fiction writer, you know, put your manuscript in double space 12-point font. Like it's you might just think that it's like, oh, I'll just put it in single spaced, or I'll put it in whatever. It's like, and they might say, or a novice writer might not know to, put it in a standard font like Times New Roman or something. So it is really cool to outline a lot of that stuff that might not be as, you know, specifically stated, and just, give a nice, easy, up to date guide for newer writers, which is really cool. And I also love the idea of having it be a panel discussion with some of the newer writers that are in that have just entered online writing and stuff like that, because it's really interesting, and I really love Mallory Smart's theory of how things kind of cycle in online writing, and because her her theory, or her observation, or whatever, which I think is 100% true, and she stated this on her podcast in the past, is that she thinks that the cycle of online writing kind of goes in 3-year blocks, where uh, literary magazines will be established, new writers will enter, old writers will exit, or they'll age out, or they'll get families, they'll move on to other things. Magazines from previous eras will close up, so there's kind of like this 3-year cycling, and it's just interesting seeing the different types of writers, like what kind of work they're putting out, and what kind of magazines they're founding, what kind of like artistic aesthetics that they're drawn to, and stuff like that. So that's super interesting, and I think Mallory's theory on that is 100% correct, because she always had kind of the biggest delineation was always kind of the original alt lit, which was like the late 2000s, early 2010s, like the Tao Lins, all of that generation. And then there was like the post alt lit, which was the 2015 to 2017, 18, 19. And then there were the people who started writing and publishing during the pandemic. She always calls them pandemic writers. And then I feel like we're in a like post-pandemic 3-year cycle now. So if like 2020 to 2023 was one of those 3-year cycles, I feel like we're right in the middle of a post-pandemic type of block of time, where I don't know if it's the Neo Cities, era, where a lot of people are starting new literary magazines using Neo Cities and this very lo-fi minimalist type of aesthetic in their magazines, or if it's kind of just, as Alexandra had talked about in the last blog post, and I talked about in my last video a little bit, kind of more of an explosion of literary magazines, which she was actually, to correct myself, she was actually more correct than I was, because there have been a lot more magazines than I was aware of that have kind of popped up this year. I think there were like 3 or 4 extra ones that I didn't mention in that last video that I discovered since then. Stuff like, what was it, Drek, Gonzoid, I think it is, Keep Planning, I think there's literally two or three more new magazines that I just learned about since that last video. Um, but yeah, that's really interesting, and that ties into this post because it is really interesting seeing the perspective of some of the writers that are in this new 3 year cycle, like Travis Shosa. I'm not hugely familiar with his work. He has submitted to my magazine a number of times, and the work has been pretty solid. It hasn't been a perfect fit, but it is really solid work. And I know he, based on this and what I've seen a little bit of, he's done some work with his own magazine, Dodo Eraser, and I think he said that there were like reading series as well. I'm not familiar with the poet named Hannah that's included in this, but I do know about J.L. Moultrie very well, and I really like his work and stuff. Um, so yeah, this stuff is really interesting. Um, it is interesting to find out how people did kind of discover this stuff, because I said as my own discovery, it's like I took to reading this book, and then I bought one of those stupid directories, and then like I don't know, I stumbled onto, maybe I stumbled onto like Duotrope or something, and that's how I found one of the early magazines that I submitted to, and then I had some pieces published in Magdalen House and Pitt Chapel in 2018, I believe it was, and then after that I kind of became aware of Duotrope, and then I joined Twitter and kind of got more immersed in everything. But it is really funny and really absolutely classic that the way that Hannah learned about this was because she just discovered a giant sticker with the words bruiser on it in all caps in the bathroom of a Baltimore dive bar, which is absolutely 100% emblematic of uh, just the ethos that Mark and Josh and the other Bruiser guys have for their magazine, which Bruiser is amazing. So that's a great story, and that's brilliant marketing on their part. Um, yeah, it's really interesting to see how these newer writers got interested in the scene, and how Alexandra, who is much more veteran, got interested in kind of like the first era of alt lit, and I think that does inform the way that each writer kind of, the relationship each writer has to the online writing scene, quote unquote. I was doing quotes outside of the frame. Um, yeah, because I guess I would call it online writing, but yeah, it doesn't matter. It's anyone can use whatever title they want. Um, and yeah, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, mistakes. That's a really interesting. They have a section in the blog post about what mistakes have you made and what would you warn others about. Um, that's a great section to have. I actually would hope that Alexandra would kind of like expand this into just like a continuing series where she talks to a whole bunch of different writers. Whether it's, I mean, I think Mallory Smart would be the best person to talk to this stuff about, because she has such encyclopedic knowledge about all of this stuff, and she um, has been, I mean, she's been running Maudlin House since 2014, and she's been around to see it all and everything, and she's such a great authority on all this stuff. So her being here for so long and being on both sides of things in terms of being a writer and being the editor and creator of Maudlin House for such a long time, she would be a great person to see or to talk about the mistakes that she's made herself and the mistakes that she's seen other people make. So that I think that would be super interesting. Um, but yeah, in terms of mistakes that I have made that I would want to warn others about, this is just one thing I wanted to comment on. Um, one one thing that I did a huge amount of early on was, if there was a magazine that I really wanted to have my work appear there, I would make the mistake of writing a piece specifically for that magazine. And I think that was a bad idea because there was no, like, I was, first of all, I was writing work for other people. And that's a bad idea because so much of the time it would get rejected anyway. And like, I would get the rejection email, and they would send a form letter that would say, thank you so much for submitting, but this piece doesn't quite fit what we're looking for at this time, blah, 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 whatever. And I would literally get angry. My response would be like, it does fit because I wrote it specifically for you. And like, that's not a great attitude to have, because just saying those words kind of takes the whole purpose out of the writing itself. If you're writing it to to the sole purpose is to please someone else, just so you can have the satisfaction of your work appearing in that magazine, um, it's not. I'm trying to figure out a way to not sound cheesy or whatever, but it's like, it's taking the soul out of the work. But it's just like, you don't want to be creating work just to tailor to someone else's tastes, because a year from now or 2 years from now, when your skills have improved and your tastes have changed and everything, you won't enjoy that story anymore, and that story will almost become an embarrassment, because it's like, oh, that's not my own work, that's something that I tried to do to impress someone else. So it's like there's a big disconnect between the authenticity of what you want to create and what you're trying to impress someone else with. And also, the editors can detect that to a certain extent, but it also, in my experience, it also hinders the writer from discovering and then honing their own unique voice in terms of the subject matter they want to write about, the style they want to use, um, the lengths exactly. Like, I can't say how many times I've had some pieces that I was like, oh, that would be such a great fit there, but the piece is 300 words too long, so now I have to take stuff out or whatever. So it's like, just, what mistakes that I've made in the past, I would warn others about. Just like, write the stuff that you're super passionate about, and don't care about who on the other side enjoys it, or like, if some quote unquote prestigious magazine is enjoying it or whatever, because that's such an incredibly fleeting thing that it's unfortunate to say, but like, it's going to be forgotten in, not a long amount of in a short amount of time. And so you want to be able to be really proud of that piece of work, and to maybe include that in a short story collection or a poetry collection. And if that's something that you just wrote for that magazine and it's not representing your passions and the work that you really, really want to create, then it's not going to fit in to, the book you want to put out or something like that. So it's just, I really believe, and I've learned the hard way through mistakes, that like, you should really just follow your passions 100%. And it's tough, but try to not worry as much about the aesthetic of the magazine and stuff, in terms of writing things specifically for magazines. Obviously, you shouldn't send, a sci-fi piece to somewhere that just publishes poetry or something. Like, don't just send like something that's completely uh, not what the magazine's looking for. But the biggest mistake that I've made is just sitting down at the outset of the piece with a blank page in front of me and say, I want this piece to appear in this specific magazine, so I'm going to try to do what they want. Like, so yeah, that hasn't worked in the past. So yeah, I would say just, try to write about the things you're passionate about, and cultivate your unique voice. And if you cultivate the unique voice that only you have and the perspective that only you have, um, and you can continually improve that into something that is wholly unique, then that's where you can build up, a small amount of, fans or an audience or whatever. Um, and I just say small because, in the online writing world, no one's making any money. So if you sell 100 books, that's a massive, massive success in my mind. If you sell 50 books, that's a huge success. And if you sell, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, that's a big success. So no one's making any money. It's all about, really creating these really fulfilling uh, works of art, and putting them out into the world, and you know stoking your passions in that manner. So that was one I wanted to touch on to a lot. Um, and I think I don't know if any of the other writers had said a similar thing, but yeah, yeah. But I mean, this is a great post, talking about how do you engage in the community, uh, how do you experience, and then it goes into like social stuff too. That's pretty interesting. Experience forging friendships. That's really interesting, and then just like defining the different terms is really cool. Um, yeah, so this is a great article, or great blog post, whatever you want to call it. Um, yeah, and I really hope that Alexandra continues doing it. Um, interviewing different writers, getting their takes on how they entered the scene, how they discovered everything, all this other stuff. So this stuff is really interesting, and this can be a really cool way to build more of the community, because it's people sharing information about themselves, and um, you know just getting themselves out there, because I had never heard of this poet from Baltimore named Hannah, and so it helps to get exposure for more people who might not come in contact with each other. So yeah, so this is another great post, and I hope Alexandra keeps it up, and yeah, it's really good stuff. Thanks for listening.